Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 595 through 597, which will cover manga chapters 669 through 671, and like maybe a page of 672. So yeah, this is where Caesar makes his grand appearance to everyone else and shows off the true power of the gas fruit. But before we get started, we have some sad news that was released this week that Yao Kazuki, the person who voices our favorite cyborg, as well as Boncré and Django, will be retiring due to his declining health. It's a really sad day that we all kind of knew was eventually going to come, not just for Yao Kazuki, but also for most of the cast. I mean, it's a really long series, and they all are getting up there in age. And yeah, he's been pretty much a part of the series since the very beginning as Django. And yeah, well before he was ever cast as Frankie, as well as obviously Boncré during Arabasta and Impel Down. And so, yeah, I want to take some time to just say thank you to him and that he will be missed, I hope that he can take some time to recover from whatever ailment he has been kind of dealing with. And I definitely noticed his decline in his voice probably around the middle of the Wano arc, where he was having difficulty enunciating certain words. And by the Egghead Island, it was becoming really difficult to kind of understand him just because of the way he was unable to kind of enunciate. And the sad thing is he's only 65 years old, which is relatively not that old. But when you see pictures of him, especially in the last, couple years, you can definitely tell he's lost an alarming amount of weight. Yet he still seems well enough to make public appearances all over the world, which is still a good sign. And I'm glad that he is still able to be pretty active, but it looks like his voice acting just is not possible anymore. And yeah, it looks like he will still make an appearance at Jump Fest later this year so that, they can properly celebrate him and honor him for his work as Frankie, as well as many other characters, while also introducing his successor to who will take up the Frankie role going forward. And I will certainly miss his voice and performance. You can really tell he gave everything he had to his performances, whether it was Django and the sort of mix of silly but threatening demeanor to Bonchan, where you can really see just how different of a character he is from the other two roles, with the flamboyant energy yet a playful and warm performance, especially once he becomes an ally to the Straw Hats. And his comedic timing was always incredible, and just how over the top he can take his performances without it ever becoming too cheesy or stupid. Of course, he is Frankie. Sure, Oda is the one writing the dialogue, but Yao has a way of just infusing everything Frankie says with so many dynamic emotions. Like Frankie, unlike the other Straw Hats, probably has the most range of emotions and speech patterns to cover, and Yao nails every one of them. Like when you think about, he has sort of like the early somewhat villainous tone in his introduction when you kind of still thought he was maybe a villain. And then you have his normal energetic Frankie. Then of course you have his over the top emotional moments where he gets really moved by someone's sob story. And of course you can't forget all those moments he gets fed a different type of beverage instead of cola and he becomes a completely different person. Not to mention, he is also fake Usopp from the Damaro Black's crew, the Mount Bluetane. So yeah, he has a variety of roles in the series, and he makes them all incredibly distinct. Not to mention all the other roles that he's had in many other different series. And all this to say that we all want to give Yao Kazuki a super thank you for bringing to life one of the most larger-than-life characters in anime, as well as countless other characters from other series, as he will be missed. And we all hope he recovers from whatever it is he's dealing with and enjoys a wonderful retirement. But with that, let's get into the podcast episode, starting with the synopsis. So Zoro, Sanji, and Brook regain their consciousness and resume their search for Kinemon, while on the other side of the island, Luffy, Frankie, and Robin make their way towards the facility, but Caesar personally appears to put an end to the commotion, showing off the power of his devil fruit and the smiley slime monster. Alright, moving on to differences. Obviously, like the last set of episodes, there are a lot of mini scenes kind of added to elongate certain moments, but some of the major changes are, there's a small scene in between when Zoro's group sees Smiley off in the distance and where we see Smoker and the G5 Marines still fighting near the docks, where we see Luffy tell everyone that he's got a good idea, but in the manga, this scene isn't present, and the next time we actually see him is when he's already enacting this plan where he basically just launches himself and Robin and Frankie at the soldiers. There's another added scene in the anime where we see the kids waking up and Usopp having trouble getting them back to sleep as the effects of the sleeping powder seems to be weakening each time it's used. And this scene isn't in the manga, but this does set up a very similar scene later on that is in the manga where the kids actually do in fact wake up. In the anime, we also see Robin and Frankie attempt to save Luffy after he's been suffocated by Caesar, but are also ultimately taken down as well. While in the manga, this happens more or less off screen, and so the next time we do see him, he's already got Smoker in his hands while Robin and Frankie are on the ground and the foreground. And the last one is a really minor change, but the scene where Law collapses while walking down the dark corridor with Monet in the manga, he actually coughs up blood when he's in pain and collapses to the ground, which I think does matter because I think Oda included the blood to differentiate and indicate to us the fact that this was happening, to Law, and what was happening to him was different to just what happened to everybody else that we just saw, whether it be Robin, Frankie, Luffy, Smoker, or Tashigi. And for most of us, we can infer that this is the case, because obviously they're in completely different locations. But to some younger, audiences, it may not be as clear. But ironically, it was because of the younger audiences that this was probably censored and the blood was removed. All right, so that's pretty much it for the differences, at least the major ones. So let's get into the episodes themselves. And starting off with these episodes, we finally get to find out what happened to Sanji, Zoro, and Brook, who we last saw went to find Kinemon's torso and were knocked unconscious by the Yetis. Turns out they're okay for the most part, but they don't seem to remember much of how they ended up where they are. It's even debatable as to whether they actually ran into the Yetis or even their existence. And I enjoyed the three of them and their sort of perspectives on whether they believe they actually saw a Yeti or not, with Zoro consistently a non-believer of all things in the mythical category, much like his belief in whether things like ghosts and gods exist. Their imaginings of the Yeti is pretty funny too, with Zoro and Sanji being very typical of where their heads are at, with Zoro's Yeti wielding a sword and Sanji's Yeti being a woman, with Brooks being the only one kind of even close to being a believable rendition of a Yeti. We get a mini flashback of how they ended up where we last saw them as they're attacked from behind from the Yeti Cool Brothers with some sort of a neurotoxin that makes the target drunk and sleepy. And I find it interesting that even without lungs, Brook is still affected by gas. And it again brings into question if Brook actually needs oxygen to survive. And I think we finally have a definitive answer that yes, he does in fact need to breathe if this gas does affect him. One thing that seems like a deus ex machina, but is actually a cool character trait that gets them out of trouble, is that while Sanji and Brook almost immediately pass out, Zoro is able to stay awake for a couple more minutes because he is, of course, the heaviest drinker in the crew and has probably a pretty high tolerance to alcohol and drunkenness, which I found to be pretty cool that he can withstand this smoke for a little bit longer. Interestingly, though, Sanji is the first one to wake up and save them from being taken by Caesar's men. And this is the moment I was referring to in the last episode about whether their physical abilities are carried over when they're shambled, because of, like, Sanji here is able to almost kick just as powerfully in Nami's sort of untrained body. So this can be read in a couple ways. Nami is physically stronger than we think, and that might be true. She's not exactly as weak as we think, considering that Nami is a pretty capable fighter, having grown up constantly defending herself with just a bow staff. Another option is that yes, shambles brings over their physical abilities of the person except for devil fruit powers. And then the last option is that Sanji's kicks are more skill based and more technique based than raw physical strength, which can also make sense since I always viewed Sanji as more of the technical and finesse fighter compared to, say, like the raw brute strength of Luffy and Zoro. Of course, the final and most likely the real answer is that it makes for a better story, and Oda took some liberties with the logistics of how Shambles works when it comes to swapping bodies. And I talk about all this, but in a later scene, we do get acknowledgement from Sanji himself that he is limited by Nami's physical abilities when we see him dive into the lake to get Kinemon's torso. They eventually do find Kinemon frozen solid in the snow, but not after walking all over him for some time before they even realize they've been stepping on him like a million times. They eventually figure out that Kinemon froze because he became incapable of moving due to his torso somehow ending up in the lake full of seawater, thus rendering his devil fruit body immobile. It's interesting to see that his fukufuku fruit is one of those fruits where the effects don't disappear even after the fruit or the user is neutralized, as we still see Sanji with his coat and everything. The next scene is one of those underrated moments that I personally love. These moments where someone who doesn't know the Straw Hats are won over by their compassion, kindness, and generosity after being incredibly suspicious of them for just being a Straw Hat or a pirate. Again, playing into that arc-wide theme that nothing is what it actually seems, and Kinemon can't even fathom why a pirate would go to these lengths to help someone in need. It'll be interesting to hear Kinemon's backstory of why he hates pirates so much, because it seems like it's much more deep-seated than being just defeated by law and being sliced up. And I'll kind of touch upon this a little bit in the spoiler section. Before they can get to the lake, they run into the remnants of Brownbeard's men frantically running from the slime monster Smiley. Zoro here makes an uncharacteristically astute observation about which direction the lake should be, to which Brook is shocked at, but it turns out the reason Zoro figured this out is because there seems to be something that resembles a mountain now in that general direction, which happens to be Smiley heading straight for them. With Smiley right there, they realize that whatever it is, it's probably dangerous, especially with the water, as Zoro observes that it's poisoning the lake with all the fish dying and popping up. Realizing that they can't leave Kinemon's torso in there for too long, Sanji risks his life to save it. Unfortunately, with this set of episodes, that's the last we ever see of them. So let's move on to the other group. Catching back up with Smoker and Tashigi, I get my wish granted, as we do see Tashigi does in fact try to use Smoker's Moku Moku fruit, but has no idea how to use it and can't even put herself back to her solid form, which gives quite an insight into how difficult it must be to learn how to use a Logia fruit. It definitely isn't something that can just be easily mastered, as just going in and out of an elemental form seems to require practice, let alone control, for using it as for combat, defense, and mobility, as Smoker has done. Which, yeah, I guess kind of makes sense. Like, that's not something your body would really be used to. And it's not something we really ever really see. Most devil fruit users we've only seen who have had them for some time and have at least a basic understanding of how to use their fruits. The only time we ever see two people who just immediately eat a fruit and then are able to use it are Kaku and Khalifa, who both got their fruits just before the battle in NES lobby. But obviously they're master combatants and they are very good at what they do, and so they probably were able to master their fruits pretty easily. And also Kaku and Khalifa got a Logia fruit and a Paramecia fruit respectively, which I imagine isn't necessarily easy, but it's got to be a lot easier than learning how to use a Logia fruit. During all this fighting, Law and Chopper are also seen sneaking back into Caesar's facility, and Chopper brings up a good point about how easy it is for Law to get to Caesar, and given how strong Law is, why doesn't he just take out Caesar himself? And Law gives a vague answer about being some reason why he can't, which would lead me and most people to think that Caesar has something on Law, like a hostage or some sort of collateral. My initial thought was it's his crew, because surprisingly we haven't seen Beppo or any of his entire crew. They've been missing this whole time, but for now this will remain a mystery. Just then Luffy comes rocketing in from the sky with Robin and Frankie on his back, and seeing Robin gracefully gliding off with her Cien Fleur wing technique is a very on brand, while Frankie chooses to crash land with Luffy, which is also very on brand for him. And seeing this trio is cool, since this is the NES lobby trio that also, that little touch that they added in the anime of Chopper all cutely cheering them on from a distance, hanging off a lost sword, with the "Go Luffy" under his breath is just super cute. With Luffy now on the battlefield, Smoker and Tashigi turn their attention to capturing the Straw Hats, but Tashigi can't really control Smoker's fruit still. But I love that Luffy always seems to genuinely be happy to see Smoker, and even expresses that he's glad that he's alright after earlier looking like he was taken out by Law. Although right now, this liking seems to be a one-way sort of thing. This interaction between he and Tashigi in Smoker's body kind of shows that Luffy truly likes Smoker despite how aggressive he usually is towards them. Because again, you can look at this as Luffy can read a person's true intentions with his amazing ability to read people, and he can clearly see that Smoker is one of the few good Marines and just a legitimately good person. Tashigi is able to once again activate Smoker's Moku Moku powers, yet she still can't control it. However, that still doesn't take away from the significance of Luffy grabbing the smoke arm now that he has control of Haki. And this is genuinely a really cool moment to see for longtime fans, considering all the other times that Luffy fought, Smoker, Luffy either got his ass handed to him without landing a single hit, or was forced to just run away or have Hancock come and save him during Impel Down. Despite Luffy's amazing ability to read people, he can't seem to tell that it's somebody completely different in the body of Smoker until Robin tells him later. And Luffy remarks how weak he's become until the real Smoker in Tashigi's body attacks him and is confused why Tashigi's so much stronger. And once he's figured it out, he tells Smoker that their duel will have to be put on hold since he can't even fight at full strength without his body and the powers of the Moku Moku fruit, which I love the respect that Luffy has for Smoker. Just then, a huge chunk of Smiley drops on top of the ship that Smoker and the G5 Marines are trying to commandeer, and it sends everyone into confusion. But one thing I'll never understand is that one Marine who tries to push the blob into the lake, what did this guy expect to happen? This thing does not remotely look solid enough to be able to be pushed. Instead, the poor guy gets swallowed into it and gets poisoned to hell. Then another Marine has the bright idea of setting it on fire, which is a little bit better, but also ultimately a really stupid idea, considering they're dealing with some sort of a gas that it's emitting, which they themselves pointed out not even 2 minutes earlier, which, okay. Although this leads to a massive explosion wiping out that ship, however, this creates an inconsistency that the anime made with their sort of filler extension of Smiley's introduction in the last set of episodes, where the anime depicted Smiley kind of sliding over fire on the fire side of the island, which should have caused, it to explode partially, but it didn't. The manga didn't have this issue, of course, because it didn't show this moment. You only saw Smiley kind of gliding down the unignited parts of the town. In all this commotion, Caesar finally decides to make himself known to everyone and begins some monologue about his Smiley slime monster and boast about his greatness as a scientist. But then Luffy, of course, he doesn't care to listen to any of it and immediately lunges up to Caesar and grabs him. However, as Robin rightly points out, that while armament haki allows people to grab Logia users, unlike Sea Stone, it doesn't nullify its attack power, so using his gas robe attack, he tries to suffocate and poison Luffy by wrapping him in his smoke. And one note I like that little bit about how Caesar has kind of developed the most lethal gas to use on his victims. It's kind of cool to see how one can actually increase the potency of the devil fruit, not by physical training or learning to use it better, but to actually use knowledge and science to enhance the powers using sort of the properties of the element itself. The idea of learning the ins and outs of the base properties of an ability to enhance its overall power and lethality is pretty ingenious and cool from a storytelling standpoint, and it really informs just what kind of a villain and combatant Caesar is. The way he strategically uses his fruit's ability is honestly pretty unique, and it's not something we've seen really, like how he uses the gastanets, which is a gas wordplay on castanets, which are those instruments that you see the in Spanish dancing, like clapping. He uses these to ignite his gas from a distance to create explosions, and I almost feel like Oda here wanted to use gas wordplay here specifically, and he chose the castanets because it allows him to call them gastanets. And Luffy, as we know, has developed a decent immunity to many forms of poison due to his extreme exposure to Magellan's poison back on Impel Down. And it's interesting that we've known this for a while, but this is the first time Luffy has seemingly internalized that he is in fact somewhat immune to poison. And I love this often understated bit of continuity from the series that's had a lasting impact on Luffy and his own abilities. We also get to see a new Gomu Gomu attack from Luffy in the form of Gomu Gomu no Jet Mace, where he flips and quickly slams both feet at the same time in an overhead motion. But for some reason, the anime sound design team really fumbled this one, as the sound effect that's used doesn't even remotely match the level of impact that's on display in Oda's original drawings, or even what's animated in the anime. It frankly is incredibly awkward. Like when you watch the scene, like it just doesn't match at all. I don't know what they were going for with this, or whether this was a mistake or something. Caesar then uses his smileys to cover Luffy and attempts to blow him up. And there's this really dramatic moment where you think maybe he got Luffy pretty good here, but it turns out Luffy's fine and he escapes no problem, somehow making Caesar contort his face into his version of NL's stunned shock face, which was pretty funny. It becomes pretty clear Luffy, in terms of combat prowess, he is far and away stronger than Caesar, making their bounty difference make sense. Luffy, wanting to capture Caesar, needs something to contain him since he's a Logia fruit user, and I love that little bit where he asks Frankie, and Frankie's looking around for a barrel, calling back to how he dealt with Caribou in the previous arc. I think it's just a funny little continuity thing right there. However, in a shocking twist, Caesar isn't done, as something happens to where Luffy all of a sudden starts struggling to breathe, and my immediate thought is that the poison is finally caught up to him, but it's something far more simple and effective as Caesar begins to systematically take everyone out, from Robin, Tashigi, Frankie, and everyone without any explanation or gas, and it begins to dawn on you what's happening without him even explaining it. He's manipulating one of the gases that everyone needs to survive, which is oxygen. And he stopped the flow of oxygen to everyone and suffocate them, which is truly terrifying and an insanely hard thing to fight against. Like you start to like race through your head like, okay, this is a crazy ability. Like, how are they going to fight this? And one thing I will give Oda credit for when it comes to Caesar is the way he uses his power, like I mentioned earlier, is very fitting of an evil scientist who doesn't necessarily have sort of the physical brawn and power of your typical villain, but instead uses his devil fruit in very calculated and unique ways, and kind of very sadistic ways too. Like, instead of using his powers to just poison or blow people away, he does things like ignite his gas on fire. His own scientific knowledge, he uses that to enhance the gases like lethality and potency. And now he manipulates oxygen around him and his opponents to down them without even touching them. This scene is pretty underrated, as it went from a really fun moment where Luffy was joyfully taking down Caesar to the tides suddenly turning into kind of a horrific way, and completely in Caesar's favor, and he's the one left standing with everyone else, the Straw Hats, the Marines, Smoker, Tashigi, all completely incapacitated, which was a very sobering scene, to be honest, especially with the way they play up the music and this like really like almost horror like vibe-esque to it. However, it makes you wonder why he didn't use this technique immediately. I know my first thought after reading this was that it might be due to his hubris and arrogance, thinking he could take them down with lesser techniques, and only resorted to it since he was losing, or perhaps there's maybe kind of like a limitation to it, like he needs to be like super close to them to do that. Who knows? But it is still a very like scary moment for our heroes, as the villain basically just completely knocks them out with ease. The episode ends with things getting even worse for the Alliance, as we see that Law's betrayal has already been sniffed out, and it seems Monet has lured Law into a trap as he collapses due to some sort of similar attack from Caesar, but we know it has to be different as Caesar is nowhere nearby, and he's approached by a mystery person, where we cut to the to be continued ending card. And there's not really much to say on this person yet, since all we get to see is the lower half of their silhouette, but it seems he has some past relationship with Law, as he's known Law since he was a lot younger and hasn't seen for a while. But we'll have to wait till the next episode to find out more about this mystery character. But anyways, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing, and also please consider leaving a review maybe. Check out my Instagram and X account at Sunnygo Podcast if you want updates on when I post new episodes, see some pictures of my manga collection, as well as my One Piece card collection now. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Just a small mini spoiler section like I mentioned earlier, but if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, spoiler section. So the only thing I kind of wanted to talk about here is Kinemon's hatred of pirates. And yeah, rewatching these episodes, it really is really consistent with just why Kinemon hates pirates so much, because when you find out what a pirate did to his friends, his family, his home, yeah, it makes a lot of sense with Kaido basically destroying his home, killing his mentor and friend, and killing other countless number of people, and then also forcing him to basically move forward in time and losing a lot of time, with all of his loved ones. And so, yeah, you can easily tell why he hates pirates, because the only pirate he's ever really known, since Wano is an isolationist country, is Kaido. And so that's his only frame of reference, really. And then now he's met Law, and back on Dressrosa, he lost, Kanjuro to Doflamingo's crew and all that stuff. So, yeah, to him at this point, pirates are the worst things in the world. And so you can certainly understand why he hates them. But again, I love that moment where he meets the Straw Hats, and particularly Sanji's kindness is what really brings out Kinemon's like beginning trust in pirates, in that not all pirates are bad. And by the end of it, he's not only made friends with Law and Luffy and all of them, but I would go as far as to say that he is an honorary member of the Straw Hat pirate crew. Like, I think he himself is now a pirate, and I hope that eventually one day that Kinemon, Momonosuke, and Yamato all rejoin to fight alongside, their crew. Because, yeah, I personally do think that Kinemon, Momonosuke, and, of course, Yamato are all Straw Hats, as well as Vivi. And to be honest, I think Law is also part of the crew as well. I mean, I know he's his own captain, but he's spent so much time with them all that I think all of them are basically honorary Straw Hat members. But yeah, that's kind of really the only thing I wanted to talk about. But yeah, thanks for sticking around if you did. But yeah, I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya.